Today, I'm excited to have Terry Arnold. Terry Arnold is a physician assistant, but he is also vice president of medical affairs for a pharmaceutical company, DermTech. And Terry's going to talk to us today about his journey from clinical practice to the pharmaceutical industry. And Terry also has a lot of good advice for people who want to get into that industry and how to deal with burnout. So, welcome, Terry.
Well, thanks a lot, Hope. It's great to be here. I am a big fan of yours and a big consumer of podcasts. So anytime I get an invite to be on a podcast, man, I can't wait to do it.
Yeah, I'm excited about one day when you have your own podcast.
I hope so. That would be fun.
All right, so Terry, I didn't realize this until I was researching you, i.e., Googling you. You were also in the Air Force, right?
Yeah, actually, my adult life, I guess, professional life began in the Air Force. I was quite privileged to attend the U.S. Air Force Academy and graduated as a second lieutenant and served in the Air Force on active duty for about 5 years.
Wow. Do you still fly?
I do fly, and what's really interesting about that is my vision wasn't good enough to fly on active duty with the Air Force, and I kinda got tired of people say, "Well, what did you do in the Air Force?" assuming that I was gonna say I flew
Right.
F-16s or something like that. So after I got out of the Air Force, I went back and I got my pilot certificate and, do a little bit of flying now. So
Mm,
I am a
that's
pilot.
exciting. I love hearing about what people do outside of their work. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. And I should also say, y'all, Terry is a leader in the PA world, at least my world. So I know you've held leadership roles and you've really worked your way up to this position. Tell us a little bit about how your journey went from practicing clinical medicine in Oklahoma to becoming vice president of medical affairs.
Yeah, well, like I was saying before, it all started with my time in the Air Force, and I had a commitment that I had to pay back for my education at the Air Force Academy. And near the end of my 5 year commitment, I was like, well, what's next for me? What do I want to do next? And I'd always been interested in medicine and had wanted to practice medicine. But in the military, you get exposed to a lot of PAs. So I knew that that may be a good path for me. So graduated in 97 from PA school and immediately went into a clinical role as a PA in internal medicine and infectious disease. And that was very intentional. And I think we'll probably come back to this concept of living with intent a little bit later. But did that. I took a role with the National Health Service Corps, serving patients in rural Southwest Georgia for a few years. That's where I
I
learned
did
to
not
really
know that.
I did, yeah. That's where I really learned how to practice medicine
Wow,
because
where were you, Terry?
I was in, I say it Albany, they say it Albany, Georgia.
That's where I started out in internal medicine. That's funny.
Yeah. So I did National Health Service Corps down there, and, like I was saying, that's where I really learned to practice medicine. Because a lot of things in medicine are fairly cookbook, patient comes in with this symptom, you work it up this way, you achieve this diagnosis, and this is the treatment. And that's all well and good when you have the resources or your patient has the resources to do all those things. But when your patient doesn't have those resources, that's when you really learn the art and the science of medicine.
Yes.
So,
That's I
um,
started out in internal medicine too, and, I think, that was intentional because I didn't wanna not use everything that I'd learned in PA school. And yeah, practicing in a rural area, people don't always have access to, you wanna order an MRI. Well, they've gotta drive 2 hours to get an MRI depending on where they are. So, yeah, I
yeah.
get you.
So I guess around 2000, 2001, and this was an opportunity that was born out of necessity. I had so many patients coming to see me that had dermatologic problems, and there was no way they were ever going to access dermatology in Southwest Georgia. So I had to start teaching myself a lot and learned that I really loved the specialty and transitioned into a dermatology job in 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. Spent about 20 years practicing dermatology, mostly private practices. One practice was a Mohs focused practice where I learned a tremendous amount about medical and surgical dermatology. It was actually Dr. David Kent and David Cohen's practice down there in Macon, Georgia, where I feel like my knowledge base and skill set really grew to another level. So
Oh,
very
yeah.
grateful to those guys in that practice. Then around 2017, I suffered a significant case of burnout, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and
Yeah.
realized I need to do something a little different with my life. And had always been interested in industry, and AbbVie was a comfortable place for me to be because I'd always done a lot of work with AbbVie. So I went over there and did medical affairs for 3 or 4 years, and then in 2020 I transitioned to DermTech, and my focus at DermTech was building out a medical affairs function for a publicly traded company.
Oh,
They
wow.
were post startup, they were publicly traded, they were growing, and they needed to really build out a medical affairs function. And so that's what I've done over the last, what is it, 3.5 years now.
Yeah. How was it transitioning from clinical medicine to working in the pharmaceutical industry? Did you miss patients? Did you feel like you were still having access to patients?
Yeah, I mean, I did miss the patients. I still miss the patients, and I think about clinical stuff all the time, and I think that makes me a better industry leader, because I do maintain that focus on the patients and understand what it's like to be a clinician. Um, I will say that has waned a little bit over time, but I still often miss those interactions with the patients and the staff and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
And did you purposefully look for a job in the pharmaceutical industry, or how did you find that opportunity?
Yeah, so people at AbbVie had been talking to me for a little bit about it and said, "Hey, when you think you might want to do something different, let us know because we have some opportunities that you might find interesting." So a lot of it was built on, long-term relationships at AbbVie and frankly in a couple of other companies as well.
Yeah, so that is I think that's really important for PAs to hear. You built relationships. Were you already a speaker for the company?
Yes. So I was doing some promotional speaking for AbbVie. I was also doing some educational stuff that they were a part of. And those relationships that went back, I mean, almost to the very beginning of my dermatology career, is really what positioned me well when I decided wanted to make that transition to full-time employment in the biopharma industry.
Yeah, I think, I don't think I'm alone, but a lot of PAs, when they first start out or before they get to know people in the pharmaceutical industry, they sort of shy away from drug reps or, go at conferences, meeting people in the big exhibit hall. And it sounds like you really made good connections that served you well when you got ready to make a transition.
Absolutely. And it's really funny because even now people say, "Oh, you went to the dark side." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I've seen some interesting things in clinical practice and interesting things in pharma. I'm not sure there is a light or a dark side, but I'm pretty happy with what I do, and I feel pretty fulfilled in what I do. So I don't know if it's a dark side for me."
Yeah, exactly. It sounds and vice president of medical affairs. I mean, that's not a small position. What do you do as vice president of medical affairs?
Yeah, so I have a lot of different roles and responsibilities that fall under that title. Um, Really, foundationally, I think of myself as just a corporate leader or executive leader within the company. And my skill set is in leadership development and enabling people to be the best that they can be in their individual roles. Now, if you look at my job description, it doesn't say anything about that,
Yeah.
but that's what I feel is really my best value to the company. I do lead a team of medical science liaisons. That's been really fulfilling because we have staffed that team predominantly with former clinicians like PAs and nurse practitioners. That was done with great intent and maybe a little bit of bias.
Yeah.
Um, I also work very closely with our clinical development and research and development teams. I partner a lot with our commercial organization, particularly on the marketing side, and doing medical review type of work for them. So that plus publications, plus medical information request. I mean, it kind of runs the full gamut. All of that falls under my job title.
Yeah. Did you ever see yourself doing something like that when you first started out?
No, absolutely not. Never had in mind that I would go to industry. To me, all industry was sales, and I didn't ever want to sell anything. Although
Yeah.
what I've learned over the course of my career is we're all selling something. And
Oh,
even when I
yeah.
was practicing, I was selling. I was selling patients on a diagnosis. I was selling people on me so that they would have trust in me and, follow my advice. So we're all selling something, even if it's yourself or just an idea to somebody else.
That's so true. I always call it tap dancing for new patients. I feel like I'm in the room, like doing like win them over. And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
so, what advice would you give to your younger self or to somebody else who is in clinical practice and considering switching over to a device company or a pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked this question because, now that I'm this far along in my career, I do think about what I wish that I had known, when I started out. And I think if I could go back and talk to myself in, 1997, 98, I would say everything's going to work out just fine. Just keep a sense of perspective about this. Keep your sense of humor and find a sense of joy about what you do. And frankly, just don't take yourself and your work quite so seriously. And I think it was good that I was very driven to learn as much and do as much as I did early in my career. But there's a need for balance, and if you lose that sense of balance, that's when you get burned out and the wheels come off, and you have trouble. So, the other thing that I would tell myself and I would advise PAs and nurse practitioners now is live with great intention. And this is a project that I'm kind of working on right now. I don't know what it's going to turn into, whether it's a podcast like yours, Hope, or a
Yeah.
book or something like that. But just living your life with great intention. Figure out what you want, figure out how you're going to get there, why you want it, all those certain things. And maybe that's something we can come back to in another question today.
Yeah. Okay. So live with intention, find that sense of balance. How did you or how do you find balance right now?
Um, so there's a sign right above my computer here, if you could see it, and it says time is finite. And when you're young, you think of time as being an infinite resource, but it's not. And, if you think about it, and I don't want to get too weird or morbid on you today, but we're just here for a minute.
Yeah.
And, life goes by in the blink of an eye. And if you don't live with intention and with purpose, um, it can go by too fast for you. You can look back on it and maybe have some regret. So I try to live with great intention. I allocate the time that I have based on the priorities that I have in front of me, and
Mhm.
those priorities, yeah, work is one of them, but it's not my greatest priority. Certainly, my spiritual life is a priority. My family is a very big priority for me, my friends, and I try to invest my time and my resources in that way. So, living with intentionality, understanding what your priorities are, understanding that time is a finite resource, and then just kind of finding the balance through those priorities and time allocation.
And do you sit down and do anything practically speaking? Like, do you look at your time each week on Sunday, or do you go backwards and sort of do a time audit at the end of the week?
Yeah, so I this is another part of intentional living, right? I have a routine that I follow religiously every single morning, even on the weekends. I get up at the same time. I eat about the same thing, it's funny that I use the word religiously because that's when I have some quiet time and focus on my prayer life just a little bit and think about what I'm going to be doing that day, making lists. I'm a big believer in making lists, and I got to check things off the list or I don't feel fully satisfied that the day has gone well. So
Yeah.
it that's just more of that intentional living.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so back to your job, because I know everybody's like, "How do I get into the pharmaceutical industry? What do I need to do?" If Terry's the one sitting at the interview table, like, what does he wanna see?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would want every PA out there to understand is you have a remarkable skill set that transcends just the practice of medicine. And yes, it's kind of tough sometimes as PAs because all we hear about is that this is one of the top 10 professions and everybody wants to be a PA and they all make a lot of money and this and that. And
Yep.
that's true. There is truth there, but there are pressures and stressors that go along with being a physician assistant and doing clinical medicine. And I think there's a sense of burnout that comes along with clinical medicine. And some people have to transition away from it or do it in a different way to restore joy in their lives, joy in their work, and personal satisfaction. So I always say you have to start with what it is that you want, and you really have to spend some time in quiet contemplation. What do I want out of life? And then why do I want that? And
Mhm.
Simon Sinek talks a lot about understand what your why is. For me, I always had to identify what I wanted, why I wanted it, how I was going to achieve it, and when it was going to happen, based on
I love
timelines
that.
and goals and things like that. So, what you want, why you want it, how you're going to achieve it, and when it's going to happen. That's just kind of the process that I follow. So certainly the biopharma device laboratory industries are wonderful places for PAs. And medical science liaison is a perfect role based on your clinical background and your education. It's a very natural fit, and that's why I've been so successful in bringing in MSLs that have that kind of clinical background. But that's not the only thing that you can do within the industry. If you want to do medical review, there's all sorts of opportunities there. Working on publications, doing clinical development, even getting into marketing or the sales side. I've seen a lot of PAs become very successful in selling products which they may not have felt like was their strong suit, but you spend a couple minutes talking to them, you're like, you're a salesperson, and I don't mean that in a
Yeah.
negative way. I mean that as a true compliment because it takes a very unique skill set to be good at pharmaceutical or device sales.
Yeah. And
Um,
any other? Go ahead, sorry.
and then, even thinking more broadly beyond just this industry, having that medical training and the ability to communicate well, which we all hone over, multitudes of interactions with a broad array of patients, sets you up for success. I mean, maybe you want to go work in a venture capital or private equity group. I mean, certainly those people are open to your ideas and want to see how you think about, new products or new services that might be getting pitched to them. Maybe you want to do your own sort of investment service, professional coaching. I mean, I can just think of a list of probably 20 or 25 different roles that I think PAs are perfectly suited for, both inside and outside of the industry, inside and outside of clinical care.
Yeah, and I love how you said figure out what it is you wanna do, figure out how you wanna do it, when you wanna do it, and you really do have to be intentional about that. Life will pass you by, and you'll spend another 10 years in a job you don't love if you don't get really intentional about that.
Absolutely. And I think that would be maybe the biggest tragedy of your life if you have to look back and you're like, man, I worked really hard. I made a lot of money. I was able to do this and do that, but man, I don't feel very good or very fulfilled about it. And I feel like I missed out on something that I could have or should have been doing. So,
Mhm.
I spend a lot of time with my kids and any other young people that will listen to me. Figure out what you want to do in life and then go after it because you're told when you're a kid that you can do anything.
Mhm.
And I don't think you really believe that until you maybe get into your 30s or 40s. You're like, yeah, I could do anything. I could have been an astronaut if I wanted to do that. I could have been an astronaut. I could be an engineer. I could be anything I want. but figure out what it is that you want and then start pursuing it.
Yeah, and make a timeline and get really, break it down into weeks and months and years so that it doesn't pass you by.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, let's see, what else did I wanna ask you? So you mentioned earlier your leadership philosophy, and you said this is something that you've gotten really passionate about. Can you share more about that with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to boil my leadership philosophy down into 2 words, I would just say confident humility.
Mhm.
I think it's important to project confidence, and that confidence comes with repetition and with experience and with knowledge and a lot of other things. But being confident, being a bold and decisive leader is important, but the humility piece of it may be even a bigger part. I think we all have to understand, or if you want to have, effectiveness as a leader, is you don't know everything, and it takes time, and we're all growing. I'm not a finished product. I'm constantly trying to iterate and improve upon myself, but being a humble servant leader. And there's a lot of talk these days about servant leadership, and it's good. I'm glad that we are having those discussions, but living beyond yourself and your own accolades and your own ego, I think for me is why I've enjoyed some measure of success. I really try to look out for the people that work for me. I really try to develop them as leaders and as thinkers. And, it's not just giving back, it's just being genuinely interested in other people. I think that that's a real key to my leadership philosophy.
Yeah, it sounds like that goes back to your why. Like that's you're not just invested in people so they can make your company a better company. You're truly invested in them as people.
Yeah, and I mean, I would be very remiss if I didn't talk about my training and development as a leader. And I was so fortunate to participate in what I consider to be the best leadership laboratory, maybe anywhere, and that's my time spent at the Air Force Academy, where I really learned what it is to be a leader and how important it is to learn to follow before you are ready to lead. And one of the funny sort of things, maybe it's not so funny, but um, as a freshman cadet, you don't have too many rights, privileges, or much of a life. I mean, you're at the bottom, the very bottom of the food chain, and
Mhm.
so you're given 7 basic responses. And if an upperclassman talks to you, you're only allowed to respond with one of these 7 basic
God.
responses. And it's yes, sir, no, sir, all this different stuff. But the one that I still think about every single day is no excuse, sir. And
Ah, I need to teach my kids that.
yeah, yeah, if I could get my kids to do the 7 basic responses, man, it would be awesome. There's no way we're going back to that. But no excuses is just something that I try to think about all the time. Ultimately, because of my role at Derm Tech, a lot of responsibility is on my shoulders. And if things don't go well downstream for me, that's my responsibility. And there will be no
Yeah.
excuses that are reasonable for why that didn't happen, or why somebody didn't perform in the way that they should have, because ultimately it's my responsibility and I can't make excuses about it.
No, I like that. I think that's something we've lost, that I had as a kid, but I don't know that I've translated that to my kids.
It's
But
tough.
yeah, I like that. Terry, do you have a group of people who are like-minded, who sort of push you and motivate you, like, a group of peers or mentors?
Wow, so many, and I think I told you if I ever have a podcast, I'm just gonna call it I Know Cool People. Um, so many amazing people, from my time in the military. Most of my very closest friends are from those Air Force days, and I've carried those relationships forward for the last 30 years and invest greatly in those relationships. I can think of so many people in the dermatology world who have been, good mentors to me, and good leaders, and helped me to develop my skills. Um, One guy that comes to mind immediately for me is Clay Cockrell. I think a lot of PAs will know that name as a nationally known dermatopathologist out of Dallas. And Clay is just really a lifelong learner. And most recently went back and got a law degree. And I mean, he's pretty deep into
Yeah.
his career and very accomplished, but it just kind of once again inspired my lifelong thirst for knowledge. And it's like, man, if Clay is going back and getting a law degree at this stage of his life, I wonder what I could do. Maybe I could pursue this or that other thing that I've kind of peripherally been interested in, but haven't invested the time in just yet.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Um, all right, so back to your burnout, because I know we're dancing around the burnout. That's like the heavy topic. Do you mind sharing with us like what that was like when you were experiencing burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I can point to so many different times in my career where I experienced burnout. And, I actually wrote an article on this topic many years ago in one of the throwaway kind of journals. And I challenge anybody out there, if you can find that article, good luck, because I don't know if it's even available. But I think the time when I felt the most burnout was late 2016, early 2017. And I frankly was just trying to do too much, trying to please way too many people. I was actually working for a private equity group in Richmond, Virginia. I was helping them to build practices, frankly,
Wow.
dermatology practices throughout Eastern Virginia. I was still seeing patients then. I was doing a lot of speaking, a lot of educational stuff for PAs and nurse practitioners. And oh, by the way, I'm doing this private equity job in Virginia, and my family lives in Oklahoma. So
Wow.
I'm flying back and forth, every other week. And it was just too much. I was completely overwhelmed. I was completely unhappy. I thought that I had achieved everything that I wanted to achieve, and it was all culminating in all these opportunities. But I forgot my core. I forgot who I was. I forgot who my family was and the priority that I had for them and for my friends. And it was just time to kind of circle the wagons and identify what I wanted, why I wanted it, how I was going to achieve it, and what the timeline was going to look like.
Yeah, and I think about a wheel, like the wheel of life. What's at my center? And so often, like being a PA, that is the label that defines me. That's what's at my center. And I have to constantly remind myself, like, that's not what I want at my center. And it sounds like with you, you had all these externals that were on paper just amazing. But when
Yeah,
you got down to
absolutely.
it, your center was not what you wanted it to be.
No, I think anybody looking at my situation at that time would have been very envious, and I would have told them, "You have nothing to envy here because this is misery." And I have all these quotes and mantras that float around in my head all the time, but one that my kids have gotten really annoyed with hearing is, "Misery is not an option." And that probably flows out of "Failure is not an option." That's an old saying from NASA during the Apollo days. But misery is not an option in your life. And if what you're doing is making you miserable, then you need to stop doing that as soon as possible and try to do something different. But
Yes.
do not continue down a path of misery, because it ends in a lot of depression and heartache and discomfort.
And it will 100% affect your relationships and your family life.
Absolutely. I mean, uh, in 2016, 2017, I wasn't good at anything. I mean, I thought that I was great at everything, but if you'd asked my family, I think they probably would have told you something different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say is just because you can does not mean you should. Just because you can be a great speaker for a pharmaceutical company or just because you can go help start a new clinic does not mean you should do that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we could have a whole other session just on that. And one of the things that people ask me a lot about, because I know I did it, is practice ownership. And I think that's great for the right person in the right circumstance. I think there is a lot of opportunity there for entrepreneurial PAs that have some business sense about them, but it can also be a miserable place as well. So,
Mhm.
before you jump into that, really understand what you're trying to achieve with it and why you want to do it, because it's harder than you think.
Yeah. Well, how did you climb back from burnout? Like, what did you do to make life better?
Um, I really spent a lot of time thinking. I mean, I was sort of living on my own up there in Virginia at the time, so I had a lot of time in the evenings just to think. I really did a lot of outreach to my friends and said, "Help me understand who I am. Help me understand what I'm good at. What do you think I should consider in this next phase of life?" Because I knew I just could not continue to do what I had been doing. And I knew I couldn't go back to, just clinical practice. I knew that was not going to be satisfying. So I really had to circle the wagons, talk a lot with my family and my friends, and figure out what my next path was going to be. But that can only be done if you invest the time, and have really frank and honest conversations with people and be open to hearing their feedback. And I approached every one of those conversations of, be hard on me, tell me what I'm not good
Yeah.
at, tell me where I'm failing. And fortunately, I have a friend group that is more than happy to tell me, or be honest with me, and I'm grateful for that. It's hard to hear sometimes, but I wouldn't have gotten through the fire if I hadn't had people that were honest with me.
Yeah, that's great advice for somebody who is in the thick of it. Surround yourself with people who will be really honest, and then you be really honest about what it is you're going through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, are there any books or podcast or other forms of media that really inspire you and keep you going?
Oh boy, man, we could go for a while here as well. I'll start with podcasts just because I'm such a huge consumer. I mean, one of my daily routines is that I go out and I walk for an hour with my dog and I listen to podcasts and make phone calls and do all sorts of stuff. But I love Smartless with Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. If you want to literally laugh out loud at something,
Oh, I love that.
check out Smartless. And my neighbors think I'm crazy because I'm out there laughing while I'm walking my dog. That's okay. That's all right. I love the Tim Ferriss show. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been following Tim for many, many years. He's got a great quote. I don't know if we'll have time for it, but I can share that with you in a little bit. The Huberman Lab with Andrew Huberman, I think, is really great. There's some good science there, especially if you're into physical fitness and stuff like that. And then my other favorite is The Drive with Dr. Peter Attia. I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, those are some good ones that I listen to Tim Ferriss every now and then, but yeah, and your dog is so lucky to have an hour. Mine has 10 minutes.
Yeah, she's usually exhausted when our hour is up. Um, the Tim Ferriss quote, if we can, I'll just share that
Mhm.
right now. And this is one I just stumbled across recently, and one that he says that he ponders from time to time. And it's that life favors the specific ask and punishes the vague wish.
Ooh,
I'm
that's a
gonna say
good
it one
one.
more time because there's a lot there. Life favors the specific ask and punishes the vague wish. And I think that maybe is the embodiment of what I'm talking about with intentional living, is just have real conversations with people, be more direct with people, be more honest, tell them what it is that you want. Because if you're just like carrying these vague ideas and these vague wishes with people and in the conversations you're having, you're not going to get what you're wanting. So you have to
Yeah,
be very specific about what it is that you want and then ask for it. And you'd be amazed at how often people will provide it if you just simply ask.
I love that. I'm gonna write it down. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, Terry, what are you excited about? Like, what's next on your wish list, or what are you looking into these days?
I'm so excited about so many things. I wish I had more time to pursue them all. Um, I think there's something to this intentional living, aspirational living concept that I've been tossing around. I don't know if that's going to find its way into a book. I've always wanted to write a book, maybe with a focus on teens or young adults. I think that would be a fun project to work on. I've also been talking a lot lately publicly about the last mile of healthcare and maybe creating a blueprint that will help people restore some joy and reason in the way that they practice medicine. Again, I don't know what format that might take, whether it's a podcast or a book or something, but that's something I'm very interested in is that last mile of healthcare. What happens between you and a patient and how critical that step is and how that seems to have been lost in this greater healthcare system that we all live within now. I'm doing a lot with genomics education content for healthcare providers. I think a lot of clinicians know a little bit about genomics
Mhm.
and they keep hearing this is the future of medicine, but there's a big gap in their knowledge and understanding because when I was in PA school, I mean, we got virtually nothing on genomics, and
Yeah.
now there's so much that is to be known. So professional development stuff for healthcare providers is important to me. And lastly, this is kind of an interest that I've just developed is really access to care issues that happen in my home state of Oklahoma. We have two major cities here where the vast majority of healthcare providers reside and work. That's Tulsa and Oklahoma City. That leaves an awful lot of geography that doesn't have access to great medical care. And I think the same standard of care that people receive in Dallas, Texas, can be received in Wilburton, Oklahoma. And now that we have all these amazing tools at our disposal, whether it's telemedicine or AI or the vast array of resources, we should be able to deliver the highest quality of care regardless of the setting.
Yeah. Oh, that's got me excited too. Well, Terry, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, you're most welcome. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. And Terry, we can link your I'll stop this.